Electron237, and I thought this was going to be another Giallo review, but to be honest, this movie might actually have me stumped. I'll just get into it. It's 1975's The Killer Is Not Alone, which I've heard this be put with Giallo. It even says Giallo Cinema, but again, it's a bootleg off of Trash Palace. There's even movies from prior to 1963 that have this on it. And I've always believed, and this is true, I don't think it's subjective, that number one rule of Giallo is that it has to be Italian, or at the very least a co-production. But for whatever reason, Spain has always been able to kind of slip through that. There's some Spanish films that have been considered Giallo. This is a Spanish film, and even though there is something of a mystery going on, and there is kind of a twist or a revelation at the end, we followed the killer the entire film, from the first scene all the way to the end. It's more akin to like a psychological slasher. Like, it's more like Maniac or Don't Go in the House, you know, something like that. I think it was heavily inspired by the numerous, probably the book and the numerous film adaptations of The Lodger, which in its own ways kind of based on Jack the Ripper, like if he had gotten caught, which I've seen the 1944 version, which I really like, and I've seen the silent version that Hitchcock did. I know he later remade it. This is similar to The Lodger, but so we followed the killer the whole time, so I was kind of thinking, how is this a Giallo? But there is kind of a mystery as well, which is, what is his trauma? Why is he the way he is? And there is someone that's looking for him, who even knows who he is, just kind of has a hunch and slowly starts to figure this stuff out. Now, it was directed by Jesus Garcia de Dueñas. I don't know if it's Jesus or Jesus. I think it's Jesus. Who also wrote the screenplay along with another Jesus, Jesus Torbato. And it stars, actually they're all right here. Oh, and also there's like no Giallo files or Hysteria Lives or Wikipedia or anything that, you know, I usually use for resources for when I do my reviews. It's not in any of Troy Howard's Giallo encyclopedias that I have, whether it be the actual 2 Giallo volumes or volume 3 of Giallo influenced films from around the world. It's not in either of those. I don't know what to call this. Proto-slasher, like a psychological slasher, proto-slasher, a Giallo. I mean, I'm not really sure. I don't know if I'm going to put this in my Giallo playlist. I mean, I've seen other people put it with Giallo, but I've even commented on videos saying, well, just because other people say it doesn't mean that's what it is, you know. But anyway, it stars David Carpenter as Julio, who's our lead, our killer. Also, Lola Flores as Dolores, the owner of the hostel that he stays at. James Philbrook as Don Enrique, which is Julio's father. Teresa Rabal, who plays Monica, Dolores' daughter. Along with Maria Rom, who I didn't know this until I was reading something I actually kind of had to dig deep for some sort of review of this. I guess Maria Rom actually had 3 roles in this, which I couldn't really tell. Plays the first prostitute that gets killed in the opening of the film, another secret prostitute that stays at the hostel that gets killed later, which is this scene, and his childhood babysitter. Now, the 2 prostitutes I thought looked alike, but I did not know that she played the babysitter as well. She just wore a different color wig in each scene. And a few other people like Francisco Piera, Jose Vivo, Juan Jose Otegui, if I pronounce that correctly, Mariata O. Wisiedo, if I pronounce that. And I actually have to use IMDb, which is really slow on this thing, but I did want to mention the score because there are some interesting things with the score, which I did like. And the effects, like, especially this scene in particular, I mean, look how vibrant that blood is. It's even more vibrant than your typical, like, European horror film. But just with the way the film looks and just how that blood looks, it reminded me of a Herschel Gordon Lewis film. Okay, music, sound department. It's not really stylish at all. It's actually pretty straightforward, but there are some interesting sequences. Like, there are some scenes given to us through flashback, like, of his childhood trauma that's given to us in pieces. When he does kill, he kind of goes into this vision, or we see this vision that he has, which is sort of like the Giallo hallucination, or like the Giallo subconscious. We've seen it a number of times. Always makes me think of like the dream sequences in All Colors of the Dark, where it's just all black except for like a bed in the center with this beam of light, where he's kind of resorted, he's still himself, but he's like resorted to his childlike self, and his babysitter is there. So is his last victim, but eventually turns into a mannequin. There's not too many scenes of that though. But like, when he's about to kill his victims, he'll kind of go into that place. Or even if he sees a woman and starts to fantasize about killing her, we'll get a scene like that. I do like those. It's kind of Lynchian, which I like. I never did find the person that did the score. But the score goes from very eerie and ominous, almost just like a sound effect, to rather melancholic, or to very whimsical, like during the opening and closing credits. Why can I not? I don't know why it's not giving me like score. Voice dubbing. Oh well. And it does kind of have like that deep red kind of child, a children's harmony kind of vocal score during the credits. But also there's some scenes like when he gets to the hostel and he's sitting around the table and all the residents are talking about this killer called the Wire Killer, because he strangles with fiber wire, where it's like he starts toning it out and we get like this rise of this ominous tone as it kind of gets dark around him and we kind of zoom in on him. I thought that was interesting. There's, again, I think it's in this scene, there's a thing on the wall of like a diamond with all these orbs coming out of it, and we see him, I think part of his kill or when she's kissing him, we see the reflection of that, and just the way it's like all these orbs coming out. Looks more like spider eyes than fly eyes, but it's kind of like a fly on the wall kind of effect. I don't know if that was the intention, but that's what it made me think of. And the story is we have this guy named Julio who goes around killing prostitutes. His parents have no time for him. They're kind of workaholics, are always going on trips. That's shown in the very beginning when they're both pretty much telling him to go away. But, and opening scene, he strangles a prostitute. And he decides to run away to Madrid to try and start over. So he stays in this hostel that's referred to him. That's run by Dolores, played by Lola Flores, who's also a flamenco dance teacher. And he just keeps to himself. I mean, we do get to know some of the quirky other characters that are there. Like, there's an elderly retired doctor, there's a writer, kind of a pervert. There's one woman that's secretly a prostitute. And yeah, we just kind of see them all interact with each other. Almost any scene where there's multiple ones, they're talking about the latest updates of this wire killer. But he starts up a romance with Monica, sorry that I'm stuttering, played by Teresa Rabal, who is Dolores' daughter, who is overworked and Dolores is kind of overbearing. All the while, he's trying to deal with his killer urges, which can be set off by a woman being intimate with him, or even catching a glimpse of like a lock of hair just kind of being askew a certain way. He'll kind of go into that fantasy world. All the while, Julio's father starts to suspect that he ran off for a reason. So he kind of does some digging, and like he goes and talks to an old friend of Julio's named Ernesto. You're like, hey, last time you saw him, was anything strange? He tells him the story about how this girl took him aside at this one summer camp or whatever. But then she came running around screaming like something bad happened, but she wouldn't say what it was. So then the dad meets up with her, talks to her. She gives him another clue. And it's just him trying to find him. And he starts to think his son might be responsible for these killings. That's the movie. That really is pretty much it. And so technically the only real Giallo aspect is, okay, we have someone who's not in law enforcement, being Julio's father, doing his own investigation into someone, following up on all these leads and trying to solve this mystery of finding someone, only doesn't necessarily know he's looking for a killer. Goes down this rabbit hole of finding out stuff about his son that he may or may not have known. Like I think he suspects that Julio was traumatized somehow as a kid, but he didn't really know how. Which, the only glimpses that we really get throughout most of the film is we see a young boy playing with like a model train set. Train gets kicked and some chemical is on his hand that burns. And then more and more we find out that, because during one of his fantasies after he kills the second prostitute, when it's like he resorts to his childhood self, after we know the name of his childhood babysitter that his father learns from the girl from the summer camp or whatever, she's now in his fantasy, and yeah, I'll save that for spoilers, but actually, I don't even know if I'm really gonna put the spoiler thing up because you can kind of tell where it's going. It's not super surprising. I mean, it kind of is, but you know it has to deal with the babysitter, whose name is Martha, and basically, you know, people are people are finding more and more out about this killer, including people at the hostel. People are noticing that he's acting kind of strange. Like before she gets killed, she's changing, and the pervert guy's trying to peep at her in Julio's room, so he kicks him out. And yeah, I don't know if I could really call this a giallo because I mean, if it is, it's a very interesting way to go about the formula or the genre. Because I mean, by 1975, giallo was out of its prime. I mean, it was the same year Deep Red came out, but as far as popularity, Polizia Teshki had taken over, and giallo was really on the downslope. It had peaked and it is coming down. It's sort of that odd period in between 74, 75, and then when Tenebrae came out in 82. And the only other things is there is some religious imagery, which upon reading this, there's some religious ceremony that's going on as the film is kind of closing and everything's, coming to a head as far as him being found out, his father being able to find him, everyone knowing who he is, and this sort of ceremony going on outside, which I don't know much about Spanish culture. I thought it was a Klan rally. I mean, there's guys like parading with huge pointy white hoods. I didn't know it was like a religious ceremony. I was like, I did not know the Klan had parades. Also, I don't know what the theme with rhinos are, but he has a thing for rhinos, as does his father. His father collects a bunch of rhinos. There's even a rhino farm nearby that he goes to. He says his two favorite things are frankfurters and rhinos. Even the relationship between him and Monica at first seemed kind of quirky. Like, she's really drawn to him just because he doesn't talk much. He's quiet, keeps to himself. And yeah, it's pretty much, oh, and eventually there is an eyewitness that will be able to provide, enough information for a composite sketch to be made. And then that's when everything kind of comes crashing down. So I guess before I get to spoilers, that's pretty much the movie. If anyone has seen this, I mean, let me know if you would call it a giallo. I mean, it wasn't even up until I watched this did I actually start to question it. Again, I don't necessarily trust this because this is on a lot of movies on Trash Palace that aren't necessarily giallo. But, I mean, knowing who the killer is in the opening scene and throughout the entire film, there's no twist about the killer except for, his backstory, which isn't really a twist. It's just more of something, fully coming to light after it's just been in pieces and hints throughout the whole film. But you do have someone on some sort of investigation that does lead to a killer, technically. But anyway, I guess I'll get into spoilers now. Can I recommend it? I mean, it's a decent movie. It's well acted. It doesn't have a high body count. It's not overly violent. But even like in this scene, another thing that makes me think of Herschel Gordon Lewis is you can see her chest moving, like she's obviously breathing, which is kind of silly. But I always find effects like this to be very charming. That's why I do like Herschel Gordon Lewis films. The score is interesting, especially the way they utilize it in certain parts, like when it's used to show how he's just kind of either becoming very anxious or completely disconnecting from everyone around him. But it's definitely, you can definitely tell where it's going. I mean, it's not one that really comes out and surprises you at the end, but it's certainly enjoyable, and it goes at a good pace. It doesn't say on here exactly how long it is, but it doesn't really drag or anything. It's decent, but again, I don't even know if, because this is the 112th Giallo review that I've been doing. I guess I'll put Giallo question mark in the title. But out of all 112, this is the one that stumped me the most as far as if, other than it being Spanish and not Italian or even a co-production, if it counts as part of the genre. So with that, I'm going to get into spoilers. So after his dad meets up with his old friend, and he tells him about the girl that took Julio aside, that she came out screaming and crying. He meets up with her, who she said that, she liked him, she gave him a gift, tried to kiss him, and then he got very standoffish, started to insult her and call her horrible things. It's a little over the top. She keeps repeating, horrible things, horrible, horrible things. Or in Spanish, it only had Spanish audio. Excuse me. But then she says that, you're just like Martha. And he called her Martha. Yeah. Martha. That's how I'll always hear that name now. And then he was trying to figure out who is Martha. And then he remembered it was a woman, a young woman that him and his wife had hired one summer to watch over young Julio, while they were away in Japan. And yeah, we start to get the idea, okay, maybe she's the source of his trauma. Because this is around the time, actually shortly after this death scene, which after this is when we see him in bed, in his fantasy world, sitting on the bed next to a mannequin dressed like that prostitute. And this other woman comes in and puts bandages around his hand. Kind of like how there's the chemical burn on the young boy's hand that we've seen in the flashback bits. So that he gets to talk to Martha. She doesn't really admit anything. It's hinted that maybe she did once the scene cut, because at first she says whatever's wrong with him is his problem. I didn't really do anything. But then he decides, I think he goes to Madrid, but he hires a PI to watch over Julio, which by this point, him and Monica are getting very close. And he tells her the story of Martha, which is, he was a young boy playing with his train set. Seemed like Martha wanted to get his attention. Again, played by the same actress. And she was the one that kicked his train out of the way, but he's still doing his thing. And then just when he picked up some chemical, she went to go like jump him or tickle him or something. Spilt it all over his hands. She picked him up, and as she's wrapping his hands, she gave him a kiss, kissed his hands, but then like took his hands, like put them up against her face, and then like started putting them down. And it just kept cutting back and forth between his eyes and her eyes. It did a good job at implying and not just outright showing anything. I do think it was more effective that way. But, and this must have been taken from a VHS because there were several points in the film, and this was one of them, where it did that sort of messed up VHS thing where it gets all discolored and pixely. And he kind of shows he rips his hands away, and I think he hits like a Jesus statue and it breaks. But I guess being touched that way by Martha is his trauma. And now every time a woman gets intimate with him, he relives that. And so Monica agrees to run away with him. Because they've talked before about how they hate people, they hate everyone around them. They just want to be alone and together. But by this point, the composite sketch comes out. Oh, and also Dolores doesn't want her seeing Julio, mainly because she doesn't want to be lonely. That's why she's also an overbearing mother. You know, she'll get empty nest syndrome or something. But by this point, when he sees that the sketch has come out in the papers and looks just like him, he goes to ask her where Monica is, but she takes him aside. She starts to come on to him. He pulls his wire out, which I think in every scene where he's about to kill someone, we see him reach in, even like the little, because it's like a little, it looks like a pocket watch that he pulls it out of, and there's like a rhino keychain on it or something. But she's able to get away, but she now knows who he is. He runs off, meets up with Monica. They start to run, they make it to the rhino place, but by this point, well actually first, he calls for Monica, but the police are already there. So is his dad. But then, I forget how, but him and Monica do meet up. It is near the rhino place. And she starts kissing him. You can tell he's fighting it. I thought that was a good scene. You can also tell that he doesn't necessarily enjoy what he's doing. It's almost like just a compulsion. And just as he takes his wire out, he gets shot. And he runs off, wounded, and I do like how it's shot, almost like the ending of Chainsaw Massacre, the way the sun is setting. Gets shot again, he's dead, and credits. I mean, it did a good job at giving us just enough pieces, but just the way the film was, you could kind of, like, once they mentioned Martha, and then we got that vision of him after he killed this prostitute, like in his fantasy, this other woman, we could kind of tell where it was going. But I still thought it was interesting. I do like movies because you don't get a lot of them where the killer is also the protagonist, you know, like Maniac, which I think Maniac's still the best version, the best example of that. That or Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, but I don't quite consider that a slasher. I think that's just a serial killer horror movie. But, yeah, this could be a number of things. Could be a Giallo, could be, it's definitely a horror film, regardless. Could be a proto-slasher, could be a more just a bloodier psychological horror film, could be a psychological proto-slasher. I don't really know. I'm just going to put Giallo question mark in the title, see what happens, but that is 1975's The Killer Is Not Alone. So I only have 2 more left from Trash Palace. I have 9 Guests for a Crime, which is another Agatha Christie style Giallo, not to be confused with Killer Reserved 9 Seats, and Man More Poisonous Than a Cobra, aka Human Cobras, which I think is its more popular title. Still waiting on a muck to come in from eBay. It's coming from overseas, so it's taking a while. I also have Amer and Francesca to get to. I still have a number of things to get to, especially that are still Giallo related. And next video is going to be a big announcement, so make sure you stay tuned for the next video, because we're getting up to the 1,000th upload of this channel. So, and it's going to be a bit of a celebration. So, stay tuned for all that, and thank you for watching.